Thank you, young ladies. Very impressive. Just a couple quick things. So, what is the makeup of the commissions that you're on, and how is it stated in the regulation how it gets established?
Sure. So the commission is 5 people, and it's appointed by. So there are 5 different appointments. The first by the Attorney General, the second by the Governor, the third by the Treasurer, and then the remaining 2 are jointly appointed by all 3. And it's an independent agency.
It's independent from government, but you're appointed by government officials.
Well, in many other states, the agencies that regulate legalization programs are under the treasurer or the alcohol or the Department of Public Health, but ours is
like our legislation is actually calling for it to be regulated by the State Liquor Authority, which
So here, so in Massachusetts, the Cannabis Control Commission would be that regulating body, and it was decided that it was placed under there instead of our alcohol control.
And so the commission is totally separate from government.
So it's independent from any
establish
particular.
the regulations.
It's an independent state agency of Massachusetts. And then it has an advisory board of 25 members, of which Shanel, Lindsay is one of them.
Okay, and are these statewide folks, the folks that are being appointed to?
Yes.
How often do you all meet? Have you started to meet already, or?
So we had a really busy last couple of months because all of the commission's work needed to be done within about a 2-month period. So that was the time that the commission was meeting and the advisory board was meeting as well. And it was really important in Massachusetts to make sure that there was representation from across the state, because you can imagine that what's happening in Boston is quite different what's happening in the western part of the state. So it was important to have different opinions there and people representing all of those different areas.
So both of you 2 ladies actually worked on creating the legislation.
Correct.
And actively lobbied for it and worked in the community to get people to support it in a referendum. And so you actually were successful in getting it passed. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your work. I ask just one other question. Is there something in your current legislation that you think is missing? Should something be added that you don't have there?
I would always like to see more of a focus on equity and correcting the harms of prohibition.
Focus on equity?
Correct. And with our legislation, I saw, and today I'm hearing a lot of the same comments that we have encountered in Massachusetts, which was that in the rollout of our medical program, it was very difficult for small businesses to get access and be part of that program. And there was a real intent in the new legislation and in the draft regulations to make sure that small businesses have access. It does become difficult when you already have an established industry. So I think that looking and ensuring that small businesses and local people also, because what we found in Massachusetts is, even though we've legalized at the state level, it is an education process for local people and towns and cities to embrace cannabis, and often that can be assisted by ensuring that local people and small businesses do have access.
So the commission, are there like several subcommittees that are part of the commission? Is there a subcommittee that focuses on equity in business?
So believe it or not, it was just the 5 of us appointed in September. We were all in cubicles in a government building, and the entire agency was us 5 to begin. And we are under the open meeting law, so we couldn't even talk to each other with a quorum. So 3 of us can't have a discussion in private. So we had a very aggressive timeline, which was to get our draft regulations out by the end of last month. And so the 5 of us had open public meetings to discuss every aspect of the regulation, and the public got to see it and to give feedback. And so now we're growing. Now we have 3 full-time staff, and by the end of the year we anticipate we'll have at least 50 people in the agency.
What's the population in Massachusetts?
Don't know that. 6.8 million. Thank you.
And within the advisory board, there were specific subcommittees on different issues. There was an industry subcommittee, there was a market participation subcommittee. I chaired that subcommittee, and we had a particular focus on looking at the equity piece, looking at ensuring that women and veterans and minorities and small businesses and farmers were having access.
One last question. What has been the response of law enforcement to your legislation?
Very supportive so far. We've had a lot of requests for training because there's a lot of confusion about what the law actually says. So
Training for the department or the individual officers? Or both?
Well, both, to
Okay.
try and make sure that the information about what the new law says is out there. There's a lot of need for a lot of desire to be compliant that I've seen. They were also very cooperative in the research that we're doing to determine what these areas of disproportionate impact are. So we had several of the largest cities in Massachusetts, we had the police agency send us their arrest data so that we could analyze it and find out what those areas are. If I may just go back to your question about what would be something I would like to see added. So the legislature actually added to the referendum that we wrote that the commission is tasked with keeping data on the participation in the legal regulated industry in terms of women, people of color, veterans, farmers. And if that data, so that data will be turned into a study, and if that study shows discrimination or barriers to entry, then we are required to take remedial measures to address that. And I think of that as like us being graded on our efforts. And so that's something that I found was a very smart and effective thing to add.
Okay, this might seem like a strange question, but it really isn't. So why did you add women when in every category that you have listed here, women are included? Disabled, veterans, people of color. Why did you add women?
The history of the cannabis industry is one that is dominated by men. And as a woman entrepreneur, I've seen that it is absolutely important to ensure that we have women-led and female leadership in the cannabis space. So I think that as we've seen, as I saw when I was an attorney and practicing in the world of lawyers, that the same thing is true for the cannabis space as well.